Shalom. Welcome again to Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. Thank you very, very much for joining us. And what we anticipate to be a very, very enlightening and challenging in many ways conversation with two of my esteemed colleagues, Rabbi Doug Cohen and Rabbi Leah Cohen-Tenenbaum, co-authors of a brand new CCAR press book called Striving to be Human, Jewish Perspectives on 21st Century Challenges. That's a chock full, and they do it all in one small little volume, which is an amazing miracle in itself. It's a very, very interesting book. Let me just, because we have colleagues, educators, congregational leadership, organizational leadership, sometimes tuning into these. Very, very worthwhile taking a look at this for book clubs, sisterhood book clubs, brotherhood book clubs, curriculum for confirmation, post-confirmation, and adult education, because the essays in here really point out and point us to a variety of different issues that are on the front pages of not only where we are as a country, but also Jewishly. We'll get into some of that as we get into the book. So again, Striving to be Human, CCAR Press, probably available at where you usually get your books or whatever, online, in person, etc. Doug, Leah, welcome. Welcome. Thank you very, very much for joining us again. Mazel tov on the book. Lots to discuss. But I want to start right away with what I'm always fascinated when we talk to authors. Why this book? Why now? So Leah, let me kick it to you first.
Well, we know miraculous things happen in Jerusalem. And it was at a CCAR conference almost 3 years ago that Doug and I met. And we were walking along and talking about different aspects of our rabbinic career. And one thing led to another. We began to talk about different works that we were working on in different areas of interest. And from that conversation, believe it or not, we left the conference with the idea of, let's go further. Let's see if we can bring some of these ideas to life in a book. Both of us had written books and written articles and written chapters for other people's books. And we then began to explore, how could we make this live? How could we make it come to life? And we knew we were going to have to get other folks involved. And one of the joys of this book was finding people who wanted to play with us and tackle these topics.
Well, the topics are huge. Doug, your response to that opening.
This book had been percolating in my mind since 2008 or 9, when Richie, you helped me in an earlier volume that I wrote and edited called Broken Fragments, which was a look at dementia in a Jewish prism. I was working on this book when I was asked by the press to work on that book. So the thinking about what does it mean to be a human being had already been emerging for me. And I put this whole project aside for 15 years until that week in Jerusalem. And it had been in my thoughts before then, but it kept coming up and being put down because I had other things that I was engaged in addressing. And then my life got a little bit liberated, and this started to emerge as a key theme. And the more that the serendipity of crossing paths daily with Leah and hiking paths daily with Leah and discussing, I realized that what this book needed was a fresh partner, that my mind needed to be engaged, and I needed to have someone that could walk that trail with me. And it became our project. It became our book. It became not what was sitting on my shelf saying, look for some fire. The fire emerged. The fire was from like a burning bush waiting not to be consumed, but waiting to be used. And moreover, I would suggest that 2009 wasn't the time for this book. This book needed the fuel of the AI lens and the new technologies that have arisen and have absorbed us in the last 3 or 4 years. So why this book? Because the 21st century, Richie, is very different than the 20th century, and especially for those who are going through a process of aging or sacred aging. What looked like humanity in our task in the 1960s, as we were discussing, or the 70s or 80s, looks like a very different world that we are sliding into today. And this world demands more complexity of review. We've got these pressures that we address, as you said so well in the outline of the book. And today, what it means to be human and what it means to strive to be human is very different than what we thought it would be in 1965 or 1975.
So in your introduction, you have this very interesting little turn of phrase in, I think it's on page XI, where you quote the Rabbi Akiva and Pardes Midrash, and the use of that phrase in that paragraph with that Midrash. You kind of explain to us why the essays in this book hit the pause button and how it relates to the Rabbi Akiva and his buddies traipsing through Pardes.
I think what comes to me in this is that the other rabbis got lost. Rabbi Akiva got through something that we all struggle with. Are we going to get through this? Are we really going to come out of this? And Rabbi Akiva did. And the reason he did is because he knew how to pause and he knew how to process. And one of the things that this book offers is a framework, a lens for how to process what's happening to all of us in the 21st century. And we're so blessed to have our Jewish wisdom, which is encapsulated in our texts, in our daily conversations, in our commentary. That's what it means to process. And that's what we're hoping people will do when they read this book. Take a pause and process.
Richie, that phrase came from Rabbanit Sarah Wolkenfeld, who is the thought leader in technology for Sefaria. And we applied that same idea of pause both in the introduction and in the foreword, because, correct me if you think otherwise, the world is moving much more quickly now than it ever did before. Technologies come up, the question to employ, they're way ahead, as Leah will teach us, than the ethics that should govern them, and even than the understanding that we need to apply them. And we know, especially your listeners on Sacred Aging, know that we operate at a different pace today than we did when we were 20 or 30 or 15 years old. And taking a pause to experience is vital. And again, Rabbi Akiva slowed it down. When I was young, I was a rabbi in Chicago, as you know. I learned from Michael Jordan, not that I met him, but I watched him, who said that the way he played so much championship basketball wasn't because the game was different, it was slower. He could process, to use Leah's brilliant term, the whole court when others were still trying to figure out where the ball was. For us, we've got to figure out where the ball is and slow down the experience of what it means to belong, to identify, to deal with technology, if end-of-life issues, at a pace that we can live with, not the pace that is being thrust upon us.
There's a phrase that we use when I do the Sacred Decision end-of-life decision-making workshop called the promiscuity of information, because it's exactly what you guys were talking about. We live in a world where we have this overwhelming amount of information, very little wisdom, but huge amounts of information. And we just don't know how to do, and it's knee-jerk. It's the TikTok concept. You'll hear something, and within 7 seconds, you've made up your mind or something. And that's why I was stuck. That's why I wanted to ask you about that phrase. I want to ask you about, before you even get in, right before the table of contents, there's these 3 quotes. I really found them fascinating. Horace Mann, be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity. Hannah Arendt, the greatest evil perpetrated is the evil committed by nobodies, that is, by human beings who refuse to be persons. And Elie Wiesel would be a hell of a dinner party. Woe to our safety to be human, if to be human becomes a heroic act. Okay, why those 3 quotes?
And each one has a different ontology. I'm very identified and linked to Horace Mann for a number of reasons. The Hannah Arendt text we researched after Sarah Basson raised some thoughts for us and suggested it. And Leah brought the Elie Wiesel text to the book. So each came from a different place. So I'll just mention the first one, then I'll bounce the ball back. I am a graduate of Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio, which explains
Everything.
A lot of my missuginess.
Explains everything.
It's done. And Horace Mann was the founding president of Antioch College in 1854 when it was created as the first school in America, perhaps in the world, to have men and women, black and white, in the opening class. And Horace Mann also was the founder of the American public school system. And Horace Mann is buried on the Antioch College campus And the obelisk over his grave bears this quote, this epigram. And every one of us at the college will lampoon the college every which way we can, but we will never spoof this text, because this text speaks to why we are students of the world and what our task is. When we go to Antioch College, we don't go there to end up like Steve Jobs and invent a company. We go there to challenge ourselves and challenge the world, and hopefully do both in some victorious manner. So there's a neat twist in this text. Be ashamed to die until you've won some victory. In other words, we're not done until we've made a difference. Until then, shame on us. So our task is to contribute, and so too with this book, is that humanity is craving our striving. It's craving, the text from Rabbi Hillel in the Pirkei Avot, it's craving our taking our life seriously, taking our role in humanity meaningfully, and not to simply go through life and be a shoe salesman, nothing against shoe salesmen, but do something for God's sakes with who we are. Otherwise, we've wasted the greatest gift we have, which is to be part of this human enterprise.
So you and Elie Wiesel.
So I'll share a little bit. One of my other roles is I serve as faculty on the fellowship at Auschwitz for the study of professional ethics. And this is a program which looks at how professionals failed to act ethically during the Holocaust. And it's not focused on the Holocaust. It's focused on professional ethics. And we draw from doctors, lawyers, journalists, business people, clergy, tech, and we bring young people over to Auschwitz and we study, where did people make professional decisions that were unethical? Leaving aside Hitler and all that craziness, the individuals, the micro decisions in which people failed to be human, and what were the consequences? And I think it's incredibly relevant for today. Where are individuals failing to be courageous as journalists, as lawyers, as doctors? And so what's old is new once again.
Oh, no, there is nothing new under the sun, to quote something. And look, there happens to be also my favorite Pirkei Avot text, which is, strive to be a human being, the Hishtadel Lehiyot Ish, the making a difference. Would it be safe to say that if you took all the essays out of this book, wanted to try to examine the question of, okay, what to the two of you is the existential crisis in the 21st century, would it be that we've forgotten how to be a human being?
I'm not sure it's forgotten how, but forgotten to taking the text that you mentioned, which we based the book's title, Strive. And Leah wrote a fabulous ending about, and she'll talk about this, I'm sure, sometime in this discussion, about when God created us, God didn't make us complete as human beings. Our task is to achieve something, to strive to be that way. Because Richie, it's not a done deal. We don't reach a point and say, good, I've done it. We're continually, whether we're 10 years old or 90 years old, in a process of trying to become the better human being later today or tomorrow. And that's part of this hishtadel, that there's an inner striving, not only the outer striving. The word hishtadel means to do it reflectively, internally. And I guess I would suggest, because it's a fabulous question, that the teaching is buried in the title, is that the striving, the process, trumps, pardon the verb, the achievement. That no matter what, we never reach having achieved it, but the process warrants and merits our being within this humanity in which we're gifted.
No, look, as we say in a lot of the stuff we do at Jewish Sacred Aging, we're started around the growth of the baby boomers. We're all seeking to try to find who we are, why we are, in the face of the ultimate questions of life and of Genesis 3. So since Doug opened the door, we'll, as they say on Law and Order, we'll walk through it. So Leah, Mushlam, you write in your essay, the concluding essay, Mazeh, what is it?
So I was playing with this idea of human beings versus human doings, and how, especially at this time, we get so caught up with doing. We get distracted. There's such a nonstop level of activity that we think being perfect is let's do more, let's do it perfectly. And what's lovely about the notion of mushlam is that it's complete, it's whole. It's not about doing, it's about human beings, not human doings. And it's a chance for us to reflect on what would be the difference if we thought of ourselves more as human beings with the capacity to be full versus human doings with the capacity to get it perfectly correct.
Yeah, and part of American society, if to generalize, is that striving for perfection, whether it's body image or something else. But that's also part of the existential crisis that we find ourselves in. It's like channeling a little Heschel in one of those books back up there about the difference between the difference between being a human being and being human, which is also embedded in your book. There is a fascinating essay, I found it fascinating anyway, by my colleague and former staff member, Jan Katsu, on the issue of belonging. He writes, "You are who you are with," which is especially important in regardless of any age. And he alludes to the fact of this contemporary challenge of isolation, of the stuff that Doug just alluded to, the overwhelming of electronics, the stuff that we're dealing with, the rise in solo agers, the idea of what it means to belong. And he also has this very, very powerful and present section on belonging to Israel. And he quotes Herzl, and he quotes alternative opinion. This essay, I think, should be taught every day now, especially with what's going on in Israel. It really talks to the idea of what it means to be belonging to something. Could you just unpack how you reacted to this essay, especially in light of the current debates around Israel, Zionism, anti-Zionism, and non-Zionism? Who do we belong to? And it's the stuff right out of a couple of weeks ago Torah portion. Are we a universalism or particularism in that ongoing debate? Tough. Anybody want to try it? Answer?
I'm happy to jump in, but that's only because I'm not a congregational rabbi.
No, it doesn't. This is a universal.
Yes. But the liability, I'm joking. I was congregational for a long part of my first run. So I think what Jan brings up is so important for this time because belonging is actually more than a word. And more than a feeling. It's an action. And what he also talks about in his essay, in his chapter, is ger v'toshav. And the role that we have as Jews to both belong and not belong at the same time, and our history of doing that. And today, I think one of our challenges, it doesn't matter what age you are, is to say, well, how do I belong with the people of Israel? And I hear a lot about the people of Israel versus the country of Israel versus this current administration of Israel. And what is eternal and what is temporal? And as Jews, we're always part of the people of Israel. And I think that in his essay, we choose to belong. Belonging is also a choice. And I think he really lifts that up in his personal life, but also for Am Yisrael, how all of us belong to the people, Israel.
From what you just, the last sentence, is being Jewish in the 21st century a matter of choice?
I'm not sure it's unique to the 21st century. I think being Jewish is being part of the Jewish people. I think what you practice, what synagogue you go to or don't go to, that being Jewish has expanded well beyond and has always been more than a religion. It's a people. And I don't think it's different in the 21st century or any century before that.
It's because Katsu raises some of those issues, whether we're a nation and he does riff on the 1897, I think, Columbus platform of the Reform movement, where we kind of we're not a religion, we are, we're just this people, or just a religion. We're not.
You and I are old enough to know both of those, so we'll leave it alone at that.
That's right.
I love Jan's chapter. Jan and I go back years. We have having Thanksgiving together in Chicago as congregational rabbis, and his mind is always fertile and creative. The problem with Jan's chapter wasn't what he included, was he had so many elements that we had to edit out because he only had X number of pages and words. And he's thankfully working on another book on expanding these themes to Zionism. As Leah was speaking, I was looking at a citation from not citation, but I guess a phrase that Jan wrote, citing from the Kuzari and Judah Halevi's text. And he says, Jan writes, "We need to acknowledge that we now live in a modern or perhaps postmodern world, and therefore we can assert our uniqueness as a people without proclaiming our intrinsic superiority. And this chosenness concept has long been misunderstood, that we're chosen because we're better. We're chosen obviously for ethics and for mitzvot. But we as Jews misunderstand that ourselves, that we don't have to live in a world of triumphalism. We can live in a world of comfort within who we are." Jan challenges us with a number of abundant truths. He's able to express from his own personal story of being himself an adopted child, to he and his wonderful wife adopting children, to he's somewhat becoming an adopted part of the Jewish people, to being a leader and a teacher of the Jewish people, reminding us that that we have an obligation to become part of our people without bearing this hubris of arrogance of being something uniquely special, but being obligatory, not being superior. So I found that Jan addressing the theme of belonging, that we're social animals, what we thought we were going to get. Jan took it so much further than we ever could have imagined, looking at the personal side, the communal side, the national side, and ultimately to the global sense of what it means to be part of the human family. I think any reader is going to find whatever dimension that they're questioning in his chapter.
That essay itself is a class. I could see that as the class. I could see that actually as a class in a confirmation or post-confirmation class, because our kids are totally unaware of a lot of these nuances, and yet they're living in a series of existential crises, sometimes day by day. There's another essay I wanted to pick your brain on before we start literally running out of time, and that's by Jonathan Crane. Crane has this phrase, Chaim Einam Chaim, life that is not life. And I found the way he uses it and the essay itself to be extremely relevant and prescient for a lot of this stuff that we're going through. And Leah, look, this is your bailiwick.
This is my day-to-day. I took the day off from that. Because No, I couldn't do this.
And I apologize for bringing it up if you're on your day off.
No, but it's perfect. It's perfect. So I loved what he wrote, and I especially loved it in contrast to how the Nazis used a very similar phrase. But let me stay with the here and now. The notion of quality of life and quantity of life is something that, as we age, we have to grapple with, whether or not we're wherever we are in our trajectory of health. And one of the challenges we have in the 21st century are technologies that enable us to stay physically alive. I put that in air quotes, but the opportunity to reflect on what is quality of life to us is often something that we only approach when the quantity of life comes into call. It's not something most of us, except for my husband, talk about at the dinner table every night. But to contemplate, well, if I couldn't do X, I really don't think I'd want to be alive. Not in a suicide ideation way or anything like that, but just like, what does it mean for me personally? The thing that's also fascinating working in this area in a hospital setting is, how do we allow for both ethics and sort of universal, this is what we're going to do, and the individualism? So some of you know, like, I still race, I still compete. And if I didn't, I don't know what my quality of life would be if I couldn't physically train. For other people, if they could sit on the couch with their little kitten and watch TV, that's quality of life. Keep me going. And so it's, on the one hand, yes, we do need laws and we do need protocols and all that. On the other hand, it's fascinating how personal it is. And I invite people to start talking about it now, whatever age you are, knowing that it can change, and to overcome our hesitancy as if it's a big surprise that we're all going to die one day. No surprise there.
Oh, you raise it's. We talk about this all the time in workshops. This actually came up again at this conference because I was on a panel with one of the leading Orthodox rabbis in doing this, and the Orthodox movement is also very involved with this. But that's the issue of personal autonomy, and so, which, again, the Katsu essay hints at this. I mean, who are we? Just totally in charge of ourselves? Or is we all dealt with it? Or is there something much larger that also has control over us, or not control, but influence over, whether it's a being, a history, a tradition? And that to me is also one of the, quote, existential crises of where we are. And medical technology has pushed that envelope. You're absolutely right. And the quality of life versus the life of quality debate, it's a lifespan versus health span, which gets talked about. That's why I wanted to bring up that essay, because I found the essay extremely important. And you deal with it, like you said, every single day. Doug, did you want to, because I want to turn to something else that you wrote as well.
Well, quickly on that chapter, we divided up the chapters. Each one of us edited and worked with different contributors. And Leah had Jonathan Crane as one of her contributors to Shepherd. And we had thought we wanted a chapter dealing with the beginning and end of life issues. Jonathan really inspired us and pushed to address that. And what happens when a life doesn't feel or isn't meritorious, isn't worth living? And he gives fabulous examples, some Talmudic discussion of that. And Leah was on the front lines with this, with working with Jonathan, that added an element that had not been a plan for the book and really hadn't been discussed in this context of being a human being, other than perhaps in some of the kinds of panels that you were describing. And we owed our readers that conversation too. So we expanded that chapter at beginning of life, quality of life, end of life, and let the quality of life kind of be placed in there to introduce our readers to what happens between the beginning and the dash, as we talk about, and where that begins to erode and to degrade. And it introduced themes that opened all of our eyes. With our editors at the press, realized that this was a much richer book and chapter because it introduced that piece, which put the two poles of life, the two goalposts, in a new context. Am I right, Leah?
Yeah. One of the things that Doug's bringing up, and it was part of the process. So we needed players, right? Yes. And I use the word playfully, who were willing to say, this much I know, and this much I'm willing to be vulnerable and explore and invite our readers to explore. And the example Doug brought is beautiful. And although we tried to craft something, there was magic in how it evolved.
That's exactly why we're having this conversation, because it's extremely relevant. There's a series of essays, Rabbi Middleman, Rabbi Medwin, Rabbi Cohen, who have these takes on artificial intelligence, electronics, humanity, the impact of AI. What's beginning now? Do we start making human beings in the Petri dish? So walk me through this little section here towards the end of the book about artificial intelligence, all this new frontier technology, how it has to do with us and how we strive to be human when the robots can do it maybe better.
Yes, there are 3 chapters, Jeff Middleman's, mine, and Dan Medwin's, which each pick up a different piece of the futurists or the transhumanist technology conversations. Jeff addressing AI, my addressing cloning and making humans, and Dan, the very idea of our no longer being consumers of information, but becoming part of the machine of information, being part of the machine itself, a la Marge Piercy, who addressed that in He, She, and It, when someday we'll just plug a little clip into our brain and we will become part of the internet, which she posited in 1990, way before even the internet had been invented by Al Gore. So let's give credit where credit is due. This book begins with where we are as moral beings or immoral beings or amoral beings, and then looks at as you said, the technologies of machines, which are rapidly becoming part of our daily life without us even sometimes being aware. And there's this fear, perhaps founded, perhaps unfounded, that a machine will eclipse us. And yes, if you go to the automobile factory in Indiana or South Carolina, those robots can make welds better than we can. And that's why 80% of the welding is done by the robots in those factories. And it probably creates a better product. However, there are limitations to what the robot can do. I grew up with that. My father's a robotics engineer, and this was the conversation we had at our kitchen table, besides the one that Leah has with her husband and hers, about our limitations and how we can be improved. We remember the $6 Million Man, the television show. That is happening today. How many of us know people with 2 artificial limbs or joints? Does that make the machine superior, though? Does the machine intrinsically, though, lack a few elements that are intrinsically and inherently and entirely human? Soulfulness, self-awareness, curiosity, courage, and the ability to self-reflect as opposed to simply self-correct. AI can correct itself when we prompt it to, but can it reflexively say, can we adjust this? We seem to surrender to the technologies, and yet we have to remember that we still have our hand on the keyboard and hitting the keystrokes. So what we have to do, and this is one thing which Leah raises so well, is we have to introduce the applied ethics. So we have to be in tandem with the technologies that we're creating. And that's part of our job as clergy, and not just to use the technology as indicated in the other book, but to challenge ourselves to ask, what does it make of us? Does it engage us or does it delimit us? And where do we have to be able to reassert the controls? And I'd say lastly, for those who are like ourselves, who are not younger than we were before, our sense of trepidation and perhaps a fear of being left out by a world which is moving in directions which we're not going to be playing in those ball fields anymore because they seem to be outside our ken. I think that, and this may be the nechemta, the ending, is that the title of the book offers us that perspective that we're striving to be human. The machines, technology, no matter what we implant within them, do not have the capacity, the willful capacity, or even the will to strive.
You see, that is the reason and the power of what we do and why clergy exists. And because ultimately, not ultimately, but embedded in these essays is also the striving for the spiritual connection to meaning and purpose. And that comes through with all these essays. The seeking of what it means to be alive, what it means to be a human being, what it means to be aware of our own finity, which both of you have addressed, and the role of belonging to something greater than our own self. Doug, Leah, thank you very much. The book again, Striving to be Human, subtitled Jewish Perspectives on 21st Century Challenges, CCAR Press, available wherever you will get your books. I wish you much success with this because there's a lot of very, very important information. And again, from our colleagues, our educators, our Jewish leaders in organizations and synagogues, get a hold of this, take a look at it, see how you can use it in curricula within your congregation, within your organization. There's a lot of very, very meaty stuff in here, linking it with text, etc. You have yourself an amazing and very contemporary course of study. To both of you, thank you very much. Just much success. Stay healthy. That's the most important thing right now. And to all of you, thank you very, very much for joining us on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. If you'd like to make a comment, please feel free to email me at rabiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. Visit the website, jewishsacredaging.com, and on that website, you will find a very conveniently located donate button. If you'd like to support our work, just click on that, follow the prompts. If you or your organization or congregation want to sponsor some of these podcasts, again, just email me. We'll take it from there. It's really nice and easy. Seekers of Meaning is produced at the Broadcast Center of Lubeck and Media Companies in beautiful Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And a shout out to our producer, Steve Lubeck. Until we see each other again on the next Seekers of Meaning, take care of yourself, be safe, stay healthy, and most of all, be kind to one another. Shalom.